The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Sitting sideline today, we got Mr. John Copenhaver. How you doing?
I'm splendid, Al. How are you?
Splendid. Splenda.
Not Splenda, splendid.
Splendid.
I'm good. That was a little sarcastic.
Yeah. No, it's not like you.
Hot here in Richmond. It's gross. It feels like my skin hurts when I just walk to the car. It's just, it needs to stop.
Well, you got to watch who you're touching.
Well, I'm just touching the air. That's the problem.
Yeah. Well, it's hot here too, but the good thing is it's all dry. It's dry heat where I am. So
you and your dry heat.
Yeah, you get all that humid stuff. So, well, after the outright DC, everything's good, right? You're all relaxed now.
We were all actually welcome to Kelly. We were all part of DC outright this weekend, which was very cool. And
yeah, it's good. Yeah. I was in the middle of a book signing, and I left to do it.
You did. That was impressive.
Yeah, it was impressive because I had people waiting. They actually waited an hour for me.
Oh, wow.
I know.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was actually a really good turnout, too. All 4 days, sold lots of books. Was pretty impressed.
Wow, that's great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Good.
I don't know why that happened, but, well, now we've got another guest who was on one of your panels. Now, her book is called Real Bad Things, and it's Kelly J. Ford. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's really great to be here with both of you.
So I have to say, this is this your second book?
It is, correct. First book was Cottonmouths.
Cottonmouths, which is, you got quite a few good reviews for it.
Yeah, Cottonmouths was awesome.
What brought you into this world of writing? Like, what was it that happened to you that made you decide to actually start writing a book and publishing it?
Oh gosh, a long time, just lots of time writing things down. I mainly started writing poetry when I was in junior high. My best friend and I, Angie Clark, we would just be in our bedrooms writing constantly. So I feel like writing was just the thing that I always did. I didn't really have career plans with it. So I dabbled in so many things. I was doing poetry, and then for a while I was thinking about screenplays, and eventually I decided to try flash fiction and then short stories, and eventually just made my way into a novel in progress class at Grub Street Writing Center in Boston. And that was where it really struck me that, oh, I guess I can do this. Because I had a full-length book that I had been working on for a long time. It started out really as a screenplay, but I couldn't let it go. And it was just one of those things that I worked on the weekends, truly, when I had nothing better to do. So I didn't actually set out with any true intention of becoming an author. I was definitely not one of those people who always wanted to be one. I just happened to always be writing, and then I was surrounded by other people who were publishing things, and so then it became oh hey, I want to do that too, you guys are cool. So it was pretty accidental, but really wonderful in the end, obviously.
How do you create your stories when you're putting together these books? Is it kind of do you have a thought or theme or some sort of event, and you center it around that, or do you build off of a character that you think of? Like, where does it begin?
It's kind of all of the above. I joke that I kind of start all of my books with vibes. So talking about Real Bad Things, it was basically a mixture of many things, but the two things that really stood out to me is my dad. He's my favorite storyteller, and he tells really weird stories. And he and my aunt, it's like how many ways you can die in Arkansas, you know? So I just grew up with that. Death and weird shit was just a part of growing up. My family would sit around a fire and tell all these gruesome stories, and we were kids and we just ate it up. We loved it. And so I just remember at one point my dad was talking about, you know, he'll just send me a text saying they found a dead body at the bottoms or at the lock and dam. So the lock and dam features very heavily in Real Bad Things. And another piece was just, I had a terrible stepdad, and honestly, it was like, you know, I wouldn't mind if that dude died. You know, I was in junior high and I hated him. And yeah, so I guess in a little way it's wish fulfillment. But yeah, that was kind of a piece of it all. And in terms of characters, I had two manuscript that I didn't necessarily abandon, but the stories weren't quite there. Not a lot was going on. And so when I was building this story based on those kind of ideas kicking around in my head, I had a teenage character from one of those abandoned manuscripts, and I aged her up because I just really loved her character so much. And she became the character of Georgia Lee. Like, I could just truly picture her as an adult based on what I'd written of her as a teenager in the old manuscript. And then I had the other lead character for Real Bad Things, Jane Mooney. She came out of a totally different novel that I had set in Boston, where I was living at the time. And she fit so perfectly with Georgia Lee. And so I kind of mashed those things together because I truly don't throw out anything. I will, if I really love a character or a setting or a situation, they stay in my head and I can't get rid of them. And so I just think about how I can use them in different ways or in different books.
I can't help but think that when you talk about your father and stepfather and the stories, that a lot of what you write, it is centered in personal stuff, personal feelings or thoughts.
Oh, definitely.
And so when you do that, and you actually publish it rather than just write it in a diary or somewhere where you're at home and it's just you or your best friend seeing it. But when you actually put it out for the world to see, does it sort of make you feel a little bit vulnerable?
With friends and family, definitely. I don't mind at all the general public what their perception might be in terms of me or my story, you know, that I can take a bad review. But with friends and family, it's definitely like, please buy it, but don't ever tell me anything else about it ever again. You know, like I don't want to know. And of course I have heard things, but, you know, my dad wasn't able to read Cottonmouths because, his eyes aren't good enough for that small type, and I didn't have an audiobook, so I kind of got away with that one. But my brother and my sister-in-law, they're both still in Arkansas, and you know, it was really wonderful to hear their feedback. And my sister-in-law was actually one of my beta readers for Real Bad Things, and it was just an incredible moment to get her feedback and hear that she was like, this is Arkansas, this is what it's like, and this is one of my favorite characters ever. And so that was really cool. So yeah, I mean, it is vulnerable, but it's also, I think it would be more vulnerable if I were telling, you know, family secrets. Like, I would never ever write a memoir. Like, I just couldn't. And God bless the people who do, but that's just not my forte. And I'm too sensitive to hurting other people's feelings, even though I do that a lot anyway, without meaning to. So,
story of my life.
So, yeah.
That's so interesting, Kelly. have a good friend who has written a memoir and always kind of wants me to do that, and I have the same
Mm-hmm.
reaction that you do. I can't imagine dealing with the fallout of
Mm-hmm.
doing that. But my question for you actually is, you live in Vermont, but you have
Mm-hmm.
your books have such a strong sense of place. Like located in the South, Arkansas. Do you feel like you needed to get away to write that, to have perspective on it, or is that just sort of, is that, you think that was the central part of the I've heard other writers say that. That's why I'm bringing it up. Do you think that was a central part of the process, or not?
I think so. I mean, I would not be the person I am today if I had stayed in Arkansas. Um, Most of my friends and some family joke that me and my brother, we should be dead in a ditch barefoot in Arkansas, you know, based on a lot of what we experienced growing up. So that distance, geographical and, time has been very important for me, but it's also Arkansas is a place where I came of age. I didn't leave until after college. So I was, all the big moments were truly in Arkansas for me. So it's a love-hate relationship, but I think because I'm away, I can have more of that love come through while also critiquing a lot of the things that are not great about Arkansas. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things, like you had mentioned, John. I think why it's easier for me, and it's healthier perhaps for me to filter my lived experience through fiction. So I don't have to pinpoint specific people or things, and I change all the town names. So even that way, so I don't get stuck in my head of going down that route of telling something the way that I remember it. And it frees me to have more fun, but to not stick to a narrative, because I think if I did, it could probably go even darker. And apparently people think that my books are dark. So I don't. I think there's dark humor, but I think Arkansas too. And I don't know if this is true, maybe, John, like in the South, we definitely have a dark humor.
Yeah, yeah,
attached to everything. It's just
there, and it's kind of,
you have to make fun of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The intensity of the emotion of the feeling of the place requires a response, and it tends to be dark humor, so
exactly.
it's a coping mechanism.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Your characters then, like Jane Mooney, when you mentioned, how much of yourself do you think you put into main characters?
I'd say, it's like they're not me. They're not based on me, but they are me, right? Because they're from my brain. But they're pieces of me and pieces of people I've met in my life. So if they were just me, that would be super boring. But I do think that my main characters are often like me, in that these characters seem like they're kind of just doing weird things, but there's this quietness to them. And I remember my parents or my aunts used to say, still waters run deep. And so I think many of my main characters are that kind of still waters run deep person, where they have lots of deep thoughts and dark thoughts that don't necessarily come out. But because it's me, and it's fiction, I have to make sure they come out. I have to make sure they have agency, and I have to ensure there's a plot, which is, not fun all the time. I love character study. I tell people all the time, I'm like, I will take your tangents and your flashbacks because I love it.
So how do you experience your characters then? Like when you're sitting down and you're putting together the book, How does Jane come to you? Is it like a voice, or is it like a movie, or something else?
I think for me, I'm usually thinking about a character for a very long time, almost a year, maybe more, before I actually sit down and write a character. So I do a lot of, what my teachers would have called daydreaming. So I still do that. Daydreaming has been a huge part of my life, and it turns out I could turn a career into daydreaming. So I spend a ton of time. I when I didn't live in the woods, and I lived in the city, I was in Boston for a couple decades. Go on lots of walks and thinking things through and kind of playing through scenarios in my head. So I kind of have an idea of what I'm going to write before I even sit down to write it. So then when I am sitting down to write it, I feel like I'm truly just inhabiting my characters. And then I go into that weird trance state that a lot of writers get into, where I'm done and it's kind of like, where have I been? I just did this thing for 2 hours and I barely remember it. And so it's kind of an out of body experience, except you get an output at the end.
Oh, so you don't just like come to in your car or something in the middle of the night, and there's a body in the trunk.
I have to be
something.
sitting. That part is intentional. I'm definitely sitting at a desk with my laptop.
Well, you just never know, right? You just wake up and there's a shovel by the bed, and
I love it when you can sink into something and it feels like, I think that's when the magic's happening.
Absolutely.
I definitely have writing days where that is not. I don't know if you have those days where like, if I could just get into this world
all the time.
outside world, leave me alone.
Yeah, and it doesn't always happen. So when it does, it's such a gift. Mm-hmm. And I think it's nice because I'm not thinking about it too much. And that really only happens with first drafts, or for me, first through third drafts, truly, where I can kind of go into that state of, I don't know if it's relaxation, focus, where I'm not really thinking about it too much. But then once I actually know what the story is like, then I have to really pay attention and be thoughtful about things like plot.
Well, do things then in your real life affect that mood? Because it sounds like it's very, so you sit at your desk and you get really immersed in this, but when that happens, or can it happen if there's something, let's say, really stressful or bizarre going on in life, or can you just turn that on and it happens, or it doesn't?
I have to really force it. I have worked a 9-to-5 most of my life. I've been working since I was 16, but I think I'm part-time now, but breaking out of that 9-to-5 habit is very hard. I feel like I'm on a self-imposed digital leash where I'm waiting for clients to get back to me or coworkers, and I'm checking things. So I have to be very deliberate about blocking my time and blocking my space. But I have been really good over the years, because I've had to work with a full-time job, about being able to work pretty much anywhere as long as I put on brown noise. I can't really listen to music when I'm writing. I like to listen to music when I'm doing my daydreaming and my kind of thinking when I'm walking or working out. But when I'm sitting down to write, I typically put on brown noise, and I can't really work in a cafe or something. But if I need to, I just put on a hat so I can't see people walking by. But yeah, I don't have a super hard time writing in different places. Like Cottonmouths, I wrote on a beach in P-Town for a week. I wrote parts of it in Cancun on a writing retreat I bought for myself because a friend had worked at a hotel and got me cheap rates. And I wrote it in a living room. I just wrote it everywhere, in conference rooms. Yeah, so I'm not too precious about my process. More just I can't have a ton of noise or visible distractions. So whatever I can do to remove those two things. It's pretty easy though, to be honest. So
how much research do you put into it for the the criminal part, or the detectives, or the different details involved in crimes and violence?
I probably don't put as much as I should. I'll start there. Because my books aren't super procedural. They're more focused on kind of the accidental criminals. So I do what I need to do to feel good. And then I have someone close to me who's a former law enforcement officer. So I'm able to run things by them and see. And then if I'm uncertain, doing that research online. But I typically do more of the research, like with Cottonmouths. I did way more research on meth because I was like, oh no, it's Arkansas. I don't want the farmers to come after me. And it was so funny because one of my friends, like, he was the only one he pointed out. He said, you must have done so much research on anhydrous ammonia. And I was like, you know what? I did. Thank you.
Well, there
like
you go.
meth circles, the social hierarchy of a meth lab. I read those case studies. I read those papers.
Wow. So, that's crazy. You didn't actually go out to some meth houses, did you, and hang out?
I mean, you didn't have to. I mean, well, I actually had someone in my family who, unfortunately, was connected with meth. And I mean, it was when I started writing this, it was very much, well, when I started writing Cottonmouths, my debut, it was pretty much when meth was really becoming a thing in the South, mainly the mom and pop, when people were, they had their homemade labs. And so, I mean, I can still just ride down the dirt road toward my dad's house and they're burnt out meth trailers. And you see that sometimes here in the Northeast too. And I don't think people realize it. I mean, it's more opioids here now, but it's still a bad thing, it's still there.
Is this sort of like in your stories in both these books, is there a subtext or some sort of point that you want readers to take away besides the entertainment?
I think if anything, it's just, I grew up in a South that is very different from what I see on TV or what I've read in books. And so I'm not necessarily hoping that someone will take something away, but I am showing a different side of especially Southern women. I think, especially in crime fiction and especially in Southern fiction, that the women are very much, I wouldn't say throwaway, but they don't have fully developed characters. And it's always irked me because, growing up Southern, the women are the ones who are the ones you really need to watch out for. like grandpa's who you run to when grandma's gonna beat your ass. So like they were really tough. And not sometimes I had a funny tough grandma and I had a really tough grandma. And and women in my family who are very strong, and you just don't want to mess with them. And I think that's missing in a lot of Southern fiction. And what's missing too is it's not just dirt poor or, plantation fiction or sororities and Southern belles. There are working class women, working class men, and you see that in Southern fiction, but I just inhabited a different world where I want to show the societal pieces that come into play, because, you know, I'm talking about generational trauma and what causes that. And a lot of that is housing instability and food insecurity and childhood neglect, some things I've experienced. So showing how those pieces of a life can change your trajectory and can change, they're turning points for characters. Like if not for this character might not have had to make this choice.
What do you think people get wrong about the South then? What is it that is most common that you hear or see in other books or movies or shows that you always kind of go, oh, that's not real. That's just not how it is. What's the most common thing that irks you?
I don't know that people get it wrong so much as we always get the same picture. The cisgender white male who is struggling with something, and they have, you know, their stalwart wife or girlfriend by their side, and they're figuring their stuff out, or it just goes batshit crazy and they're doing weird things. So, you know, whatever. So yeah, I don't know that it's anyone getting it wrong. Unless you're talking about people who write about the South who aren't from the South, and then they definitely get things wrong. But it's like, no, it's that you actually, there is no Target in Northwest Arkansas. I'm so sorry. Goodbye. No. So, but if that makes sense. So yeah. And also you don't have a ton of queer characters, and there are queer people in the South, and there are, you know, people of color in the South. And so whenever I'm talking about Southern fiction, I try as much as I can to lift up those voices because they're so important. And I think that's the piece I miss so much, is that the Southern fiction that gets lifted up is oftentimes from straight white males.
Yeah.
John might know something about that.
Yeah, he's a straight white male. Yeah.
Yeah, you know
what I mean.
I do know what you mean, and I think that I think that outsiders, and I think sometimes people who thought they were insiders and are no longer, you know, look back on a place, and I don't know if you find this, Kelly, but they reduce it or oversimplify it. That's the thing that drives me bananas. I mean, sometimes it's like you would think that the only people who lived in the South, or I'm from Appalachia, so like who lived in Appalachia, you know, are either super poor or super rich, or like, you know, it was just,
exactly.
And I'm like, most of the people I knew were middle class folks, working class folks, and it's just it's a sort of problematic outsider stereotype. And then of course you're dealing with the idea of there being, you know, queer characters or that kind of thing. I was going to ask you, Kelly, if you feel like it gives you, you know, the way you write the South, or your sensibility, do you think that has a particularly like queer point of view, or is it more something else? It's actually a question I ask myself a lot. That's why I'm asking you.
I think I'm all queer all the time with my writing. I didn't used to be when I first started out. I was definitely more, as you had mentioned, Al, that vulnerability, that was much higher for me when I was first starting out, of course. But I think, honestly, just getting older, you know, I've been writing for a long time. I've been trying to get published for a long time, but I've also been a woman in tech, and I've had to deal with some really dumb stuff that I shouldn't have to deal with. And so there's a part of me now that everything it's not filtered through a queer voice. It just is my queer voice. It's how I see the world. And so my characters are just unabashedly queer. And so that comes through for them as well.
Well, maybe explain to this hick Canadian here. What is Southern noir, or what should it be?
Oh gosh, I feel like this was a question I get all the time, and I never know how to answer it.
Well, what would be the difference? Like here I am, I'm up in the Great White North, and then someone goes, "Well, is it a Southern noir?" And it's like, well, I don't know. What is that? Like, what's different?
Yeah, I think that, and you guys can give me your thoughts too. I think for me, noir is a nod to a certain mystery category, whereas Southern fiction, Southern Gothic is, I think there's an expansion of what a crime can be, what constitutes a crime, because I think you're getting into less of the straight up murder mystery and more into kind of the degradation of society, of emotions, people's lives mentally, from the things they encounter in society. But I don't really know. Like noir to me is I always think of, gumshoe detectives and that sort of thing. But, in talking with Krista Faust, because this question came out at a BoucherCon conference, and she said, you know what, noir is black, it's dark, so it's just dark. And I was like, oh right, that makes sense. So
yeah, it's really interesting. I think there's lots of schools of thought about. I teach film some, and particularly film noir, and there are like different schools of thought about what noir is. And some say it's like a type of detective character, Philip Marlowe, that kind of thing. Some say it's a mood or a feeling. It's sort of the mise en scène of the whatever the setting, or their shadows and darkness. What that particularly is true when you think about film. But the last one I find most compelling, which is like this sort of pessimistic sensibility, like kind of faded characters that are locked in and can't quite escape, that stuff, which feels like that has a lot more connections to like something like the Gothic, Southern Gothic stuff. I always feel like when people say Southern noir, I kind of think Gothic in my head in some way, not maybe in the traditional way, but.
Yeah. And I like that. And sometimes even with Southern Gothic, it reminds me too much of Deep South. So I kind of like Southern noir because it can encapsulate a lot more of the woods, for me.
Yeah. The woods.
Yeah. I like that definition. Yeah. Cause I relate more strongly with hill people. It's the Ozarks, the Arkansas River Valley. That is far more Appalachian. I always mess it up, and everybody has a different pronunciation. Damn it!
It's either way is fine, and sometimes I say.
But I feel more connected with those folks because it is that almost you don't trust anyone. You're really scrappy and you're hiding out in the hills, and bad shit happens there. So yeah, not that bad shit doesn't happen in the Delta, because wow, don't we know it does.
Different flavor of bad shit.
Yeah. Right.
Do you ever have difficulties getting into the head and writing, maybe conveying a character which you don't like, and you talk about the violent stepfather and then having your own, does it sort of hit too close to home for you to kind of really get into that character?
Not really. I think if I don't like a character, I honestly just delete them. Because I think if I'm bored with this character, someone else will be. And I think all my characters, I really love them, even the really bad ones, because I love the composition of who they are and what made them who they are. And I think that's the thing I love most about fiction is, and writing, is that I'd like to kind of reverse engineer a situation, kind of like, how do you lose your eye? You know, and that's kind of a nod to something. And I kind of look back and I'm like, how did you lose your eye? Kind of like talking to a character. So sometimes I'll do interviews of my characters, imagining them as, say, 80, 90 years old doing an interview. And at that point, they don't care. They're going to tell you everything, or a deathbed confession. And that's kind of where I start to learn more about my characters and what they went through. And so I do a ton of just background thinking about who these people are. And I think because I do so much of that, I know them as fleshed out people. It's hard for me to not like them, even the bad ones, because I can say, oh, you're so bad, you're so good, you know, like Warren, the stepfather character, I hate that guy, but I love him as an antagonist.
Mm. How do you classify your characters then? And I say that because with a lot of fiction writers, they'll say, well, it's like my children, it's like my family, it's like, you know, something like this. Do you have a classification or a feeling toward them?
I think if anything, I think of them as just characters I'm very close to, because you sit with these characters for so long. And I think I'm a very slow writer and I struggle more with plot. And so I've put them through so much before you've even seen them on the page. And then before whatever they've been through, you know, what you see on the page, they've been through so much. So for me, they're just these wild characters. It's almost like you fall in love with a character with TV shows and something, like people love Walter White. It's like we writers have that ability to fall in love with those characters the same way that fans do, only we're the ones that create them.
So you're getting quite a bit of good feedback on your writing on both books. Quite a few people say good things. Like, so how does that make you feel, or does that sort of make you more cautious about when you're writing the next book?
You know, getting good feedback feels, it doesn't, like if it's from family or friends, I don't trust it, which is often why I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And then with my first book, it didn't get much press at all. It, you know, was just kind of sitting out there. And so I was kind of craving, like, does anyone like it? Does anyone know? So I actually did go on to Goodreads, and luckily there were these really awesome women on there who read it and shared it with one another. And it, you know, I think that helped a lot. And then going and to BoucherCon and meeting people who had read it helped. So that was really nice. And so I think that helps, you know, with Real Bad Things, I have a much bigger audience, and it's definitely a weird feeling to be perceived by the general public because I just, you know, I can't look at the reviews for my current book because I'm in the middle of developmental edits, and I don't want that voice in my head that's like, you know, you do use too much dialogue. You know what? Your plot does suck. You know what? This book is disgusting. I'm like, excuse me, have you ever seen the trailer for Human Centipede? Because if we want to talk about disgusting, let's have a conversation. But you just don't, it's so subjective, and it's too loud right now. So whenever, you know, I get gifted with someone saying something nice, I take that to heart. And I'm very grateful because I think it's hard to publish. It's hard to write a book. It's hard to publish a book. It's hard to get anyone to even notice you in such a saturated market. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm hoping that my book does well enough that other queer writers like me in this genre, either Southern fiction or Southern crime fiction, queer fiction, whatever it is, will have at least a comp they can point to and say, hey, you know, here's a comp for my book, and not have the troubles that so many of us have had trying to sell books with queer characters.
You know, but if someone's giving you a bad review, you can always just tell them, look, I don't go to your job and slap the sailor's cock out of your mouth. So
I
don't
just
come
can't.
to
I
mine.
won't.
Well, you know, but the thing is, you can always say, yeah, you're right. If someone says something's bad to me, I always go, yeah, you're exactly right. You're right. Exactly. Because you think it's bad, it's bad.
Well,
It's bad.
you
Yeah.
just can't read good reads review. I mean, I just don't. I personally
You
don't.
can't.
It's for
Yeah.
reviews. I do look at Amazon, but I think it's just Goodreads is just a little.
I think it's better to
Mhm.
look at the overall picture. Like when you go look at
Yeah.
something and you see 500 reviews and you got 4 out of 5, that means overall people really like what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and I think that's the best way to do it without getting too into it, you know, and start
Mhm.
micromanaging every little word you're using, you know, because of what you heard, you know, avoid the noise completely. Now I want to be a
Definitely.
really good writer and be a star. Okay. So what do I got to do? I'm asking you. So how do I become like Kelly J. Ford? How do I do this?
Oh God, struggle for years, cry,
You didn't just make it
take the
overnight?
feedback of bad people.
You didn't make it overnight?
mean,
You didn't just like wake up one day and
No, absolutely did not. No, this took a long time. I tell everyone, I'm like, tenacity overrides talent every time, because I really do believe that people can learn how to write a book or write a story, but it definitely takes time. Like I still struggle with so many pieces of it, and I know so many people who do. And I think staying humble and just knowing, being able to take that feedback and going back to your work and shaping it into something better, and know that you can do better. But so many people just stop. And I'm not one of those people. From a very young age, I've been very competitive. I was the only girl who swam across the pool in kindergarten.
Me
And I
too.
was like, I'm going to be that girl. So, anyone who tells me I can't do something, I am 100% going to try to do it.
So
Reasonably speaking. Like, I'm not going to climb mountains or anything. I'm not crazy.
oh, come on.
You actually want to do. I don't know. Maybe you want to climb a mountain.
Exactly. I don't. It's just way too cold.
Yeah. I don't understand.
I love to watch the documentaries.
Right.
That's
I
all you
love
do.
to be terrified.
Yeah. That's all you need. Well, who do you go to be terrified? Who do you go to for inspiration? And it doesn't have to be writers. It can be anything. Like, is there any particular thing that gives you kind of a strong feeling or surge to kind of go, yeah, reinvigorates you? Or
Really just reading other good books. I think for Real Bad Things, Dan Shawn's Ill Will. God, I love that book. It was so cool. And, murders involved. And then Gillian Flynn's Dark Places was really influential for me. And, Shirley Jackson, We Have Always Lived in the Castle. So I think there's so many great, great writers. And I don't feel competitive, even though I'm competitive. When I read their things, I want to write as well as they do.
Yeah, I feel
You
I
know?
feel when I read someone that I love, I feel thankful for it. Like here's this
Mm-mm.
beautiful thing that I can read and perhaps aspire to probably
Mm-hmm.
not succeed, but it's just thank goodness you get to sit there and read it. I think that's
Oh, I run and give them a
Yeah.
1 star and tell them they're terrible. No. So, listen, how do you like do you like to interact then with readers and fans or just people in general? And if you do, how do you do it? Like what social media platforms can people find you at, or a website? Like, where do people go to find Kelly?
Well, I'm on Twitter and Instagram. So I think that's where I've interacted with the most people. And you get different people. I think the crime community in general is pretty active on Twitter. And they're the most fun writer community, I can say. I've been in a few. And God, I love them. They're so giving and they're so funny for writing about murder and gruesome
right.
things. So, yeah, so I primarily have interacted with folks on Twitter. Like I remember, you know, it's kind of weird. You think it's word of mouth or something, how someone hears about you and then you meet it. Like I met someone at VoucherCon and then they're following me online or we're just talking or, I think if like John knows someone, then I'm like, oh, I totally know you too, because I know John and we're both writers. So we're in the same community. So I'm going to promote you and I'm going to interact with, so I think for me, it's very organic and just hanging out with people either in real life or online and just being myself. And I don't pretend to know much. I just cuss a lot and promote my friends.
That's got to be my saying.
Well, there you have it. Now, do you have a website?
I do. I am at kellyjford.com. It's pretty easy.
Yeah, that's we'll have that up, of course, and so people can find it with one click and maybe say something nice.
He should.
Oh, please do.
Please do. So what's happening next? Like, where is Kelly Ford going next?
Well, I'm physically going to VoucherCon, so I'm hoping to see a lot of folks there, even though it's still COVID, and so I'm going to have my mask on. But I think that'll be fine. It'll be good to be connected with the crime community again in person. But for right now, I'm just trying to get my next book for Thomas and Mercer back into their hands. So I'm in developmental edits for my third book, tentatively titled The Hunt.
Now that's part of it. That's an Amazon publishing. Is that correct?
Yes.
How do you like that? I guess that's hard to say on air, isn't it? But how do you well, no, but is it a great experience overall?
The Thomas and Mercer and the Amazon publishing experience has been really wonderful. No lies found. They're just from the moment that, they even heard about me, there was enthusiasm because many of them had read Cottonmouths or knew about Cottonmouths. And so that was cool to have someone reading your stuff on submission and they know about your first book. But they've been really great. And because I am in technology, it's a good fit because they have schedules and they have goals and deadlines and they have really detailed information to provide you in terms of what to expect, what to look for, that sort of thing. And they've been super supportive. And, my publicist there has gotten me into a lot of hands. So they've been really great. Bunch of really wonderful people working over there and publishing a lot of marginalized voices. I
was about to ask that question. Do you feel that?
Yeah.
I'm starting to sense that from them, which is cool. Very cool.
Yeah, and it's really weird because you're like, that doesn't make any sense because it's all about metrics and data and that sort of thing. But I do think that they're taking some chances on writers that a lot of traditional publishers won't take chances on, because you put us in a P&L and we're coming up negative.
That's
perception wise.
Yeah. Oh, well, hopefully things will get a little bit better with main publishers, but can't hold your breath, How was the pandemic? Was the pandemic like difficult on you in the writing area?
I don't think so. I mean, it was difficult for everyone, obviously.
Right.
But I'm very privileged. I work in IT, so I was able to work remotely. And I work for a really wonderful company, and I have space, I have time. And so I was able to really focus as much as I could, but I was also on a deadline. So I feel like I'm always on a deadline. So sometimes the world seems to go on around me. And then I kind of lift my head and I'm like, oh my God, how long have I just been inside the house and not left? Which is a lot. Turns out about a week.
Well,
so
just remember to change your underwear. That's all.
Oh, every day. Nobody sees me. Nobody cares. But I have some semblance of civility.
Some civilization.
Yes.
Yeah, standards, but well, it's really interesting talking to you. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And, of course, now the book we're talking about is Real Bad Things, and the guest is the author, Kelly J. Ford. So, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. This was a really good time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kelly.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or show, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.